It's been a huge lift, and it's fantastic to be here. I have, I think, about 40 slides that I'm going to get through in about 15 minutes. So this is going to be a little bit update of like who we are, what we do, and then a lot of just like random, interesting things that I think should be like generally compelling, interesting takes on what it is that I would like to see more of at Fun in the Commons and why I'm targeting those specific things. One quick logistical note before I get started. Ben, there is a timer for 1:40 here. Ben? There's a timer for 1:40 here. If I could update to make sure I don't run too long. Gonna keep this to 15 minutes. So, Protocol Labs, if you're here, you probably know what Protocol Labs is. We're driving breakthroughs in computing to move humanity forward, and you probably know us for one of these many projects. The Network Goods team is not a team that works directly on any of these things. We are focused, as Ben said, on engineering tools and opportunities for revolutionary coordination systems. And within that team, there are 3 large sub-teams, one of which is focused primarily on revolutionizing research systems, the systems that generate knowledge for us. I guess I should mention the motivation behind the name Network Goods comes from the fact that we find that public goods and commons, with their very precise economic definitions, don't often capture the kinds of things that we in the world need from groups of humans coming together, forming communities or networks. And the term for any good that arises in the context of a network is a network good. And so we are the team that focuses on network goods. Our logo is meant to be evocative of both a depth chart and an RJ45 connector, which I derive great joy from, and most people probably just ignore. Network research, revolutionizing research systems. Network funding focused on making sure that systems that have or want to foster these network goods can do so effectively, can fund these systems. And we also have a team, Research Acceleration, and I'm realizing that some of this is getting cut off a bit, that drives various requests for proposals, programs, grants, bounties, advisorships, sponsorships for the Protocol Labs network at large, is building expertise in running and deploying these programs in order to provide that expertise back into the kinds of program development the other teams do. That is pretty much all I'm saying about the teams themselves. I want to emphasize a bit more and dig into coordination systems. What do we mean when we say revolutionary coordination systems? I would say that I'm using this in a very generalized, abstract way, and I would inspire you to think about a bunch of these different systems that humanity has as examples of things that were at one point kind of an invention. Like, maybe it wasn't like one day it didn't exist and the next day it did, but over time you could see that we went through qualitative shifts where, like, at some point there were not democracies, and at one point, like some later point, there were. You have coordination tools to help people decide on goals and state and effectively communicate what those goals are, whether that is the emergence of the corporate form or anything down to things like labor unions of the sit-in. We have coordination tools to collectively build things like metric system. I shouldn't just read this slide. We have many of these types of things, and the only reason that we don't have more of these, or one of the reasons that I think is most interesting as to why I would claim we don't have more of these, is that we don't think about going out and explicitly building new ones. Usually when you end up with something like this, you're trying to solve a specific problem that isn't build a humanities scale coordination system. And it's always really interesting to live in a world where something like the internet or Bitcoin shows up as one of these new things that you can do. And I would put automated market makers on roughly the same scale because it does seem to have similar potential impact on humanity. And I will not claim that this is at all exhaustive, but I would encourage you to go about your days and try to identify more of these systems because it's really interesting to see where they show up. Coordination systems are really important and growing in importance recently because I think that we should all expect roughly unfathomable technological progress in the next decade or two. There are some fairly obvious trends that you might be able to extrapolate from, but there are other things that you can predict based on technological trends combined with fiction. It's worth noting that Jules Verne predicted a lot of the future, but so did George Orwell. I think it's really flashy to look at things like a metaverse and not miss over the fact that to millions of people, they use Facebook and WhatsApp and don't realize or don't attest to using the internet. And you could imagine that something like that could happen for something like an immersive 3D virtual world. And this should be vaguely terrifying. Similarly, you can apparently reconstruct images from people see, like human sees image, fMRI measures neural activity, sends it through a deep learning system, and you can reconstruct the image from that head. Apparently, this is something that it has been possible, not great, but I expect this technology will only get better with maybe some fundamental limits that we probably aren't that close to. And like we also have like very clear technological progress toward AI systems that are consistently outcompeting human creativity in things where we have scoped metrics for what success looks like. And all of these trends should combine to make it very clear that things might not go as well as we might hope. That said, it's very interesting to note that all of these downside possible outcomes arise from people not coordinating well enough to explain what they want and build the future that they want to have. I liken this to sleepwalking toward dystopia, where I love this quote that misunderstandings and lethargy perhaps produce more wrong in the world than deceit and malice do. At least the latter two are certainly rarer. This later got reformulated to never ascribe to malice that which can be explained with stupidity. But I think that this is a more charitable take that I like more. People often follow things that seem like the best choice or the only choice or the obvious choice. And what we don't realize is that the space of possible choices is, I think, uncountably infinite, or at least I would argue uncountably infinite. And as a result, people are often in these immersive community systems as much a victim to the situation as they are as complicit in the general case. I'm not arguing that for an individual, any given individual, but I feel like there is some amount of like everyone opting in to systems to some extent when like people used to have like violent overthrows of the government, and we don't really have that anymore, and it's not clear if that would be useful in some instances. That's probably not a good direction to go in. I really do like this this kind of framing of no single raindrop feels responsible for the flood, no snowflake feels responsible for the avalanche. You're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. We can, though, coordinate better. We can have better outcomes. And I think part of the claim for funding the commons is that we can achieve those better outcomes with better coordination systems, and we can achieve better coordination systems with better tools and practices. These practices are just things that you should get in the habit of doing, things that we should try to build tools to make very easy and delightful to use. I feel like I remember being a fairly early adopter of Venmo and loving how convenient it made handling money when you didn't have cash on you. And I feel like there are so many types of things that should be that trivial, but because someone hasn't thought, oh, this would be a valuable thing to make, we should have better tools for coordination, we don't end up seeing things like that. And so if you saw the world and said, I want to make things radically better, you might ask how you might think about this. This is probably, this blog post is probably the link that I have shared more than any other link in my life. This is a particular table from this blog post. Complex systems researcher Janelle Meadows wrote this blog post, which became the penultimate chapter in the book Thinking in Systems. And it lists, in increasing order of effectiveness, how you might think about changing a system to change its general behavior or outcome. And part of what Funding the Commons aims to do is get people to look at the systems around them, think about how all of the participants in the systems, or at least most of the participants in those systems, would want it to behave, and then find the kind of change, like modifying the structure of information flows, or change, evolve, or self-organize the structure of that system. And I guess part of the goal of Fund in the Commons is to create a mindset or paradigm for the system of humanity, of like, we should have a focus on changing systems, building new systems. We should push into the zeitgeist this sense of, like, I feel like when I was in college, there was the thought of, if you want to change the world, create a startup, build a product, sell the product, and you can use that to fix any major problem. And I think that is an interesting and highly empowering framing, largely because it kind of gives you a recipe or a path to follow. And I think that this is also a similarly effective path. Build tools to help people do, accomplish shared goals together better. And if you do that in a scalable way, you can lead people to pursuing that. In the next 5 minutes, I would like to push through a slide change and 5 very interesting directions. These are not representative of what I think the future of funding the commons should be. These are 5 directions where I would like to additionally add content or provocative thoughts to get you to think about this. It's going to be roughly 1 minute each, so strap in. Starting off with macro cryptoeconomics. I feel like people, when they think about cryptoeconomics, think about it in terms of microeconomics, and I would love to see more experimental, more experiments generally in cryptoeconomic systems. You can see this in massive multiplayer online games, but, and I will note that I don't know enough about Keynesian economics to steelman it, so I'm not going to stand up here and strawman it, but I would love to see people start explaining what experiments they could run or should run in some of these crypto systems to see the efficacy of various theories, of various decisions. And if you have a talk or know someone who would be interested in giving a talk about this kind of thing at a Fund in the Commons, please let me know. One of the basic takes of modern monetary theory is that the national debt is, or could be framed as, a claim on future minted tokens. I think that from a crypto perspective, this seems far more intuitive than if you think about it from a nation-state perspective. So I would urge you to look at some of this with an open mind. I do think that there are things like the ultrasound money meme from Ethereum, where if you look at this from like a classical economic perspective, you'll see, like you'd see that like decreasing supply of money is not necessarily a good thing. If you treat tokens as stock and not as currency, then you might end up thinking that this seems like a really good idea, but I would love to entertain a discussion or debate about whether or not it's really a good thing that you can profit from just doing nothing and sitting on your ETH. I'm very interested in hearing more about, like, I would entertain talks that would push back against this, and talks that would go into more depth in favor of the idea that ultrasound money and a deflationary currency, obviously a highly inflationary currency is not great, but deflationary one is not great either. I'm also very interested in the idea of everyday governance tools. I mentioned this previously. Oh, those emojis did not render in PowerPoint. That's interesting. Social choice theory, maybe Alice prefers some things over other things, Bob prefers different things, and there is a design decision that has to be made when you try to aggregate preferences. That question is how you aggregate them. You could do it based on equal weighting, you could do it based on the amount of money or tokens they have, or the number of CPUs they have, but you basically have to pick some function and then something to optimize that metric. And I will note that if you're worried about existential risk from AI, getting an AI to figure out what a good way to maximize that metric is, or identify what a combination function could be, becomes a very interesting AI alignment problem. And if you or someone you know has interesting directions to work on for this, please apply for a grant at grants.protocol.ai RFPX. I'd be very interested to read those. There are tools for trying to maximize those metrics. Liquid democracy is very compelling. Would definitely recommend reading about that, and ranked choice voting if you haven't heard it. I also haven't seen toolings for either of those, or Macy, this what I think is a cryptographic solution to a lot of online voting problems, and I'd love to see tools like this built. If you build them, come present them at Fun in the Commons. We also have I now have a YouTube show with Divya Siddharth about governance tooling, why it matters, context that you might want or need for Fun in the Commons. So if you want to recruit your friends and they come watch one of these talks and they say, oh, I don't know what social choice theory is, or like, what is the principal agent problem, then this should be a resource to get people up to speed. Continuing at behind time, I think that it would be interesting to move code in the courtroom. Smart contracts are great, but they are everything that's difficult about law and everything that's difficult about computer science at the moment. I incubated this project for a bit. It's a very interesting talk about how you could take contracts, legal contracts, and reference code from them, reference smart contracts of the states of decentralized databases, and use that to inform the legal contract in a way that you could take it to court if the contract got hacked. And I think that this is like a very interesting, compelling thing to connect corporate forms that the government understands to blockchain forms that can be highly computable and dynamic. I think it would also be interesting to move courts into the blockchain, where I claim that code manipulates information in the same way that law is the best system we've developed for describing and manipulating and controlling the flow of human actions. And if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. Federalist Papers. The difficulty with government is that it has to control the people, and you have to also have it control itself. And we don't really have anything like checks and balances in blockchains. And I think that it would be really interesting to start designing some of those systems and present on them at Fun in the Commons. Sound like a broken record now, but it seems worth reiterating. We see these systems that represent people based on the number of tokens they have, the number of CPUs they have, and I think it would be interesting to have systems where the governance is more explicit. I could have equally put up a picture of the blog post tyranny of structurelessness here for this. I think that there might be a missing piece that is trusted humans adjudicating outcomes. Last up, better intellectual property. We recently ran this workshop, Protocol Labs did. I would point out these two talks in particular, where you have novel ways that you could change existing intellectual property structures to allow radically better collaboration between people. I think it's worth highlighting. All of these ideas, I think, are kind of at least heterodox, possibly even fringe. I feel comfortable talking about them at this venue because I think that if you're here, we all want better coordination systems for humanity. We all are generally aligned on what a good outcome is. If you haven't come across the idea of adversarial collaboration, it's setting up identifying two people who disagree, identifying a third person who can run an experiment that both parties agree will inform the other on whether or not their theory is correct, or be willing to admit that their theory has at least holes, if not flaws. And I would love to run adversarial collaborations around some of these ideas. So if you agree or disagree, come talk to me about either of these, and generally, let's collaborate, potentially directly, potentially adversarially, and here's some of the links to projects that we have. Other than that, I will happily yield the -2 minutes, 2.5 minutes I have to Matt Frelich, the head of network funding. Oh.